Out of the black of the deep range and into the light of the deep strange. Come at the hour, come at the mothership that is Coast to Coast AM. Good evening and welcome to the program, everybody. John B. Wells in with you tonight for a program we believe you are going to like. Almost a year to the day, Dr. Samuel Milham, MD, MPH, was on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie back on the 13th of August last year, and he's back again. His book is Dirty Electricity, Electrification and the Diseases of Civilization. And as I have made my way through his book, it all begins to make sense, wondering where all these diseases have been coming from. Oh, is it toxic waste? Is it air pollution? What is it? What is it? Well, a very strong case indeed, has been made for electromagnetic radiation in all its various forms. You know, for years I wondered, gee, all these TV and radio stations just blowing this stuff out all over the place. High-tension power lines strung right above the jogging and bicycling paths. Cell phones, stuff like that. Does anybody really know what these devices are doing to everybody? And Dr. Milham, an epidemiologist, has a pretty good handle on this, and we'll talk with him. Speaking of those little things, I think I mentioned this a few times on the program, but maybe it's happened to you. Have you ever grabbed your smartphone, they call them smartphones now, iPhone or Android, whatever you have, and click that thing on in the middle of the night to kind of see what time it is, or maybe somebody sent a text that you didn't expect at that time of night, so you're like, what is this? Is some sort of an emergency or problem? And then when the screen comes on, you're just like, God. I mean, it sets your eyeballs on fire. Well, get this, from Mail Online, have you got screen sightedness? Smartphones are causing sight problems to soar, warns eye surgeon. David Allenby says there has been a 35% increase in the number of people with advanced myopia since the launch of smartphones in '97. 35% increase. He believes the problem could increase by 50% in the next 10 years. The problem is so common he's given it a nickname, screen sightedness. 50% of 30-year-olds could have the problem by 2033 due to smartphones. As we go through the night, we'll have Dr. Milham for a couple of hours, and then we'll do some lines with you, open lines, semi-naked lines, scantily clad lines, because Gina will be taking your calls and then funneling them into me. And then I'll funnel them back out to you. So why don't we just take our little break and get right into it? Let's talk about this dirty electricity. I'm telling you, everything in the book is here. No pun intended. I mean, from everything from male breast cancer to multiple myeloma, male breast cancer and EMF exposure, that really got me, and microwave-exposed rats, a University of Washington experiment, and so forth. This is going to be a good one, so strap in tight. This is Coast to Coast AM, Saturday night edition. Here we go. Dr. Samuel Milham is the scientist who first alerted the world about the frightening link between occupational exposure to electromagnetic fields, the electromagnetic pollution, and human disease. He warns that because of the recent proliferation of radio frequency radiation from cell phones and towers, terrestrial antennas, Wi-Fi and WiMAX systems, broadband internet over power lines, which, by the way, is not dead. People think it's gone away, but it hasn't. And also personal electronic equipment, we may be facing a looming epidemic of morbidity and mortality. Welcome back to the program, Dr. Samuel Milham. Good to have you.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Well, Doc, let me just put it this way. Just let us have it, because many of us have wondered, where is all this disease coming from? It can't be, you're an epidemiologist, which means that you research and plot the trends in disease. Am I close?
I mean, absolutely. We look at the distribution of diseases in populations, and you know, the people are aware that the link between cigarette smoking and lung cancer is made by British epidemiologists. They studied doctors over a long period of time and had smoking histories, and then counted the lung cancer deaths, and they just showed dramatic association between pack day smoking and this disease. And basically, I started sniffing around electricity about almost 30 years ago. I was enamored of occupational studies, using the death record for studies, and most death records have an occupational statement on them, and an industry, where you work, what you did. And when I'd done a study when I was back in New York State that showed men who died of a weird cancer called Hodgkin's disease more often worked with wood. So I got thinking, hey, if we could pick this association up, let's look at all occupations and all causes of death and see what we get. So when I showed up in Washington State in 1968, that's the first thing I did was spend a year coding death record occupational statements with my secretary. And a year later, we cranked the stuff out. We saw an association an intuitive association between people who worked with electricity and certain cancers. And that's where it all started for me.
Well, tell us a little bit about your New York State Health Department experiences.
Well, that was my first job at medical school and an internship, and then I went to Hopkins and got a Master of Public Health, and then I turned up at the Washington Health Department, the New York State Health Department, and I think it was early 60s. My God, time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
And I got what I realized is, hey, here's this big state. It's got all these births and all these deaths, and they have a piece of paper, a death record and a birth record coming through that place on a routine basis by law, and very little is being done with it. I mean, people counted mortality nationally, and they've studied death records. National Center for Health Statistics publishes an annual compendium, but nobody looked at occupation systematically, and I did some work with the Hodgkins and found the association with people who worked with wood. About the time I did that, moved to Hawaii and came to the West Coast, where I finally got my last job at Washington State, and I repeated the woodworking study in Washington and Oregon, where they got lots of woodworkers, and found exactly the same thing. So having found that association, I said, hey, let's look at everything, look at all causes of death, and we found all the expected stuff turned up. Pilots die in plane crashes, electricians get electrocuted, roofers fall off the roof, et cetera, et cetera. But we had some new ones that stuck out, and one of the main ones was this association with electricity. At the time, people were interested in magnetic fields, power frequency magnetic fields, which anytime you run electricity through a wire, the current flowing through a wire makes magnetic fields. And that's what they were studying, was power frequency magnetic fields, 60 cycle in this country and 50 cycle in Europe. But it turns out they were looking at the wrong thing. That what really was getting people, and has been getting them since Edison first started putting DC down the wires in New York City, was the electrical pollution, high-frequency transients, voltage, dirty electricity. The dirty electricity is a term coined by the utilities. You buy 60-cycle electricity from them to run your machines, your motors, and et cetera, and they know they're not supposed to. It's supposed to be fairly pure sine wave. If you look on an oscilloscope, you get a nice valley and peak. But what's happened over the years, actually starting with Edison, it hasn't been so clean. And years ago, I read through Edison's archives, and from the very beginning, he was having trouble with his big generators in New York City at the Pearl Street station. He had 9 of these jumbo generators. I guess they're huge things. And he initially made direct current, and later on they went to alternating current. But he had brush arcing, and he wrote about it. He cared about it because it was wearing out his machines. And anytime you get arcing, that's one of the things that makes dirty electricity, these high-frequency transients, and sparking and arcing, and anything that interrupts current flow, like dimmer switches or compact fluorescent lights, and now there's a whole raft of devices. That's really why I called the show, to try to get back on. Since I talked to George a year ago, I've learned that all these so-called green and renewable energies are lethal. I mean, all the energy sources, wind and fuel cells and solar, that tie to the grid, and they generate direct current, and they use inverters to make to tie it to the AC so they can go out to the grid.
Right.
They all contaminate the grid, every damn one of them, and with the solar, it seems that they all use the same sort of inverter, because when I look at it on an oscilloscope, it's always 20 kilohertz. 20,000 cycles a second, and it's got a very characteristic waveform. Once you see it, you never forget it. It looks like beads on a chain. So I've looked at dozens of houses and some big commercial solar outfits, and they make it, and there's another whole raft of appliances and devices coming out that. These are called variable speed drives or variable frequency drives. Electric motors used to have an on-off switch or a high-low switch. Now they can vary the frequency, and they're putting them on air conditioners and well pumps and any other electric motor. Dairy farmers first got wise to it because they buy new milking machines and the cows would stop giving milk, and it turned out that they were, since they pump the milk around the bulk tanks, et cetera, that they with my friend Stetzer helped these people. Dave Stetzer, who basically had invented this business, showed that their variable frequency drives on the milk pumps were making the cows sick, and they wouldn't give milk. And he actually quantified 10 millivolts, which is just a trivial amount of voltage, would change the cow's milk production daily by a pound. Up or down.
That's unbelievable. So in the broad strokes now, what is the difference between, just for the layman, I know nothing about electricity other than don't stick your finger in the socket. Yeah. What is the main fundamental difference between dirty electricity and clean electricity?
Okay, well, by clean, I mean a nice, clean 60-cycle sine wave. I mean, it's got problems, but it 60 times a second, it goes from plus to minus. But the dirty electricity is very high frequency stuff, and it's spiky. It happens. You get very rapid rise times. If you look at the dirty electricity curve, it looks like hair spikes up and down, up and down, up and down. But like I said, the solar is around 20,000 cycles a second.
And what effect does this produce?
Well, it seems that any time you get a rapid rise time, it changes bodily function. Cows stop giving milk. It changes your neurotransmitters. It capacitively couples to your body, and I've got a paper out fairly recently that I think what's happening, and other people who do this work think that the way it works is it causes a generalized stress reaction. Your body doesn't know what it is. It reacts like it's a stressor of some sort, and mounts a immunologic and endocrinologic response to stress. And since the stress never goes away, after a long time, the system is fatigued, and your immune system goes south, and that's when you get your cancers, amongst other things. But it's all the diseases. Suicide, of all things, that's almost certainly an EMF disease. There were good studies in Britain that looked at residences of suicides, and they just went to the front door of the house and measured the magnetic field at the front door and found that suicide residences were higher. Half a dozen good occupational studies where they actually put meters on the guys to see by job title what their exposures were. They showed that. And then if you look at the mortality data in this country, going way back into the 30s and 40s, and I did this one paper that really drove me to do the book. It started with leukemia for me, childhood leukemia. I showed way back when, actually it's a paper by Court, Brown, and Dahl, published using U.S. data showing that the childhood leukemia peak, the major type, which is a common lymphoblastic leukemia, it wasn't there it's an age 4 peak. It wasn't there until we electrified. And so I got electrification data for this country so big, and electrification was so expensive that the cities got it first. Most of the cities had it by 1900. But the the countryside, the last farms didn't get electricity until the mid-'50s. So you had half a century where you had two big populations, one with electrical exposure and one without. And just systematically, if you look at the data, urban areas, all of which were electrified, had twice the mortality of almost everything. You know, all the cancers, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, blah, 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 you know, suicide. And this, and when I showed that the childhood leukemia thing was that the age peak spread across the country in sync with the residential electrification, it turns out that in the censuses in 1930, 1940, they asked whether each house was hooked to the grid. And that data is available. It's been available forever. In fact, the people who wrote the volumes, that the vital statistics volumes, noticed in 1930, they in bold type, they said urban cancer rates are 53% higher than rural cancer rates. Now, you think that'd catch somebody's attention, wouldn't it? But nobody did anything with it. Excuse me. That's how it really started for me, and when I couldn't get anybody to pay attention to this, I figured I'd go to the people by writing a book and try to get the word out there. I mean, like, and ever since my Coast to Coast shows, I get calls from people who are dreadfully ill. Like, I'll tell you one really poignant story. This gal heard me on Coast to Coast, bought my book, and then she called me and said, "Hey, you know, we just had a new water pump put on my house," and she said, they put it on their well. It was a community well. Three or four families had this well. It wore out finally after years. They put a new one in. They put a variable frequency drive on it, and the day they fired that thing up, she just got dreadfully ill, and she knew because she watched them putting it in. It had to have something to do with that. So she moved out in the garage for a while. Then her animals started getting sick. So she's been in a hotel in the Union Gap, Washington, for 2 months, trying to sell her house in the orchard she planted with her own hands. And I went and measured the place, and this pump puts 20 volts of dirty electricity into the ground at the transformer right near the house. And here's another huge problem that I bring up in the book. You know, when the grid was built, all the electricity that comes to your house or your office went back on the wires. I mean, the electric circuit, it travels at the speed of light, but everything that comes to your house has to go back. It goes back to the substation, okay? Yep. And the way the grid was designed initially, it all went back in the neutral wire, which is connected to the neutral at your outlet plugs. You know, the hots are up on top. The bottom is the little round things, the ground, and that's attached. And your fuse box or your breaker box to the little green screw, which is ground, and that's attached to the ground rod, and it also all goes out to the neutral wire on the pole. About 30 years ago, they started getting, when the computers came in, they started getting house fires because this dirty electricity, the high frequency stuff, doesn't like to run back in wires. They have a skin effect, it's called. Low-frequency stuff runs in the wires just fine, but the high frequencies runs on the outside of the wire, so you need a bigger wire, a thicker wire, with more capacity to carry the dirty stuff. So when the wires couldn't handle it, they get hot and burn. So they changed the building codes to require thicker wires in residences and buildings for the returns. However, the utilities, instead of beefing up the return on the poles, just dump the stuff into the ground at every transformer. You can go out to any transformer you can see up above your head. There's three on the sides. There's 3 knobs, 3 contacts. The outside 2 are the hots. The center one's the neutral. And you look at the neutral; it's got a wire runs down to the ground attached to a ground rod. Yep. So right now, 80% of the electricity that's delivered to your neighborhood is going back to the substation through the earth, and it'll do it too. It does it. In fact, in really rural places like in Australia, they have what they call single-wire earth return systems, where they have a single wire that delivers the current to the house, and all of the returns go back to the ground. So it just goes back to the ground. It'll take the course of least resistance. If there's a pipe, metal pipe, it'll run through. But this is creating terrible problems in your substations. People get shocks and can't use the swimming pools. And
Unbelievable.
a couple lawsuits coming down the pike. I'm going to testify about those. And the other thing the dirt in the ground does is it makes cows sick, and that's how we learned about all this stuff.
I got you. I'll tell you what, Doctor, we have to take a little break here, but when we come back, let's carry on with this particular part of our discussion tonight, and then let's get into smart meters and cell phones and these things that are being foisted upon the public with little or no alerts as to what may happen to you if you use them. This is Coast to Coast AM. If you take a spin by the coasttocoastam.com website, in the news you will see no fantasy, souped-up soldiers are coming. Not that there's anything wrong with the ones we have, but the souped-up soldiers are coming. Killer bees could solve population crisis. Yeah, little draconian, but maybe. CIA acknowledges existence of Area 51 in declassified documents, which means it's moved. And could hairy wood ants change the way we communicate? I don't know, maybe. We'll be right back with some more of tonight's discussion, Dirty Electricity, Electrification, and the Diseases of Civilization with Dr. Samuel Milham on Coast to Coast AM. Stand by. Dr. Milham, clear us up a little bit on the electricity returning to the substation through the ground.
Well, in this country we've got it's called a grounded wire, WYE system. In Europe, they don't have that. You can look at Public Utility Commission rules. I've got a copy of the California rule. It says, "Thou shalt not use the earth as a primary return for currents." Period. It just says you're not supposed to, but they do it, and there's no force of law to the PUC rules. So they do it, and it creates havoc with people animals on the ground. It gets into your houses through your water pipes, through your ground rods. It really affects businesses. A big train company factory in Wisconsin, their pipes were corroding. It makes pipes corrode, and they're replacing their pipes every couple of years until Stetzer showed them that what was causing it. So they just had a dedicated substation put in just for them. See, if you're close to a substation is like a sewage treatment plant. All the dirty electricity runs back to it. So the closer you are to the substation, the more garbage there is in the ground, and the more electronic junk you have in a neighborhood. Like when smart meters go in, the ground voltage goes up. I mean, I've measured a number of places like that, and no good comes of it. And it makes animals sick. It makes cows sick. It makes people sick. And,
Doc, I got to ask you a question. How do you respond to naysayers who say, normally I ignore them, but I feel like their minds are just closed. But when somebody says, I've been in the electronics industry for years and this is just quackery, how do you respond to something like that?
Well, I just tell them to read my book and then get back to me if they have any factual errors there, or if they have anything they don't understand. I'd be glad to explain it to them. I mean, how can, I point to the Amish. I say, look, here's this Mennonite sect that came over here in 1837 from Germany. They shun electricity for religious reasons. They think it's a device of the devil. When they buy a place or a house, they rip the wires out, so they don't have any electric wires. They don't use electric gadgets. Their cancer rates are half what ours are. Their diabetes rates are 40% of what ours are. There's no ADHD in their kids, no childhood obesity in their kids. There's almost no suicide. There's no autism. I mean, my God, here's a population that lives right amongst us, and by virtue of the fact that they don't choose exposures to our electronic junk, they're 100%, they're 50% healthier right off the bat, and you can't ignore that kind of stuff. They say, well, it's their diet and their exercise. Nonsense. Right.
I understand in Europe, many parts of Europe, they have, particularly in Austria and Germany, they have a timed kill switch that kills all the electricity to your room.
Well, that's smart. And I know a lot of electrosensitive people, they basically shut everything off as often as they can. And a lot of times they wind up just, living in one electrified room. And but the ground business is bad news. Like I said, I'm involved in a couple of lawsuits. There's one area in Redondo Beach, 4 or 5 houses had to get bought out by the utility because people were just getting shocked, getting this shocks when they touch the faucets, etc. when I measure houses, I always get the voltage between the sink, a sink faucet, and the floor, just to see what kind of contact voltage the gal's getting when she's doing the dishes, and that's all coming through the ground.
Gotcha. Well, let me ask you this then. What about coils in mattresses? It seems like a coil would be an antenna. So is it too much of a stretch to suggest that if you're lying on a mattress that's like a bed of coils, that you're lying on a massive antenna array, and that might not be good for you?
Well, there's people that have said exactly that. When I was a kid, I used to use my mattress coils for an antenna for my crystal set, so I know it works.
Mm-hmm.
And there's people that suggest that since a lot of people sleep on their right side, that's why the right side of breast cancer is higher, because that's the side that's closest to the mattress.
Oh,
that's not far-fetched at all. Metals are good antennas. But anyway, we were talking about, I mentioned cows. Stetzer, who's an industrial electrician, he runs a motor repair shop and rewinds motors in Wisconsin. He taught me all I know about this business. And he and Martin Graham, a professor emeritus of electrical engineering at UC Berkeley, they were responding to complaints by farmers starting 20 years ago that, hey, their cows weren't given milk, and they traced it to this dirty electricity business. And they finally, actually 10 years ago, they'd had the data in hand. They did a 1,000-cow study. They would go to a farm, and they'd unhook the utility electricity, and so they knew what was coming from inside, what was coming from outside. He had a generator along, so he could put in what he knew was getting. And they showed clearly that as little as 10 millivolts of the stuff would knock a cow down a milk production of a pound. I mean, that's a lot of money, billions of dollars probably over the 20 or 30 years. They couldn't get that stuff published till like last year because there's so much corruption in the journals, and the utility industry, the cell phone industry have big bucks, and nobody wants this word to get out. But anyway, they got a paper out now, but what's happened? Dave called me last week and said that the Wisconsin legislature, where there's a bunch of lawsuits coming down the pike, is going to pass a law that's going to say you can't sue the utility. So I mean, they got them red-handed. They know they're causing the problem, and the farmers aren't going to have any legal recourse. So there you go.
Well, in an ideal society, there's not much we can do about these TV and radio stations blowing stuff out all over the place, and cell towers and everything else. I mean, it seems to me this might make a good case for the proverbial tinfoil hat, maybe even a tinfoil suit. Yeah, well,
there's a less CMF in Albany cells. I've recommended some people use who are really sensitive. They make a Faraday cage, which is just a wire cage. They have fabrics with wires in it. They make a tent over the bed that's grounded, and that can protect them when they sleep. Because one of the first things that happens is these people can't sleep. They just get insomnia, and have a whole raft of symptoms that the Russians described like 30 years ago. But you mentioned cell towers. I tell you, people think that the main problem with cell towers is the phone. Well, cell towers put out radio frequency. That makes your phone work, okay? But people don't realize that all transmitters, including radios, TV, and cell towers, run on direct current. You can't buy that from the utility, so they buy AC, alternating current. They change it to DC with a switching power supply or an inverter, and they all have backup batteries that they have to charge DC batteries. So they make DC to run the transmitter and to charge their batteries, and the device that does that puts out a terrible amount of dirty electricity. If you read my book, I got a picture of a school with a cell tower on campus, and the kids were just nuts in those classes. Near the tower, because the dirty electricity was coming into their classrooms. Teachers had cancer spades. The kids were unteachable because they had ADHD-like symptoms. And we could change the kids' behavior just by filtering the dirty electricity out of their classroom, in spite of the fact that the radio frequency from the top of the tower was still blasting away 100%. So we know that their behavior and probably the cancers were due to the dirty electricity. In fact, we did another school, which I write up in the book, La Quinta Middle School. The teachers complained they had a cancer epidemic, and they sure did. And we showed that it was related to how much dirty electricity was in each classroom. The cancers were in the classrooms that were hot, that had a lot of this stuff in it. So, to me, it's an open and shut case, but that's why I'm talking. That's why I wrote my book, and just trying to alert people that these electronic toys are lethal, and beware of solar on your house. Well, at night you're okay, but at daytime it's going to get you. But hey, I learned another one. I got a letter from a poor school teacher in Arizona. She said, I had to move out of my house because my neighbors put up a solar water pump. I'd never heard of this one before. And she said, but what's curious is it bothers me at night, too, when the sun's down. So I looked it up. What it was is they've got some water pumps that with the solar cells generate direct current, and they have a device that is called the MPPT, maximum power point tracking, which optimizes the current, that the DC that the solar cells are putting into the battery. And then at night, when they pump water, they got a variable speed drive on the submersible pump. So she was getting sick every time the pump came on at night. That's why the solar thing was bothering her at night, even though it wasn't generating then. But the stuff is everywhere.
Well, let me get straight on something here. So it doesn't matter if it's AC or DC. Either of those conveyances of electrical energy can be dirty. Is that correct?
Well, Edison's original system was DC, and anytime you interrupt current flow, whether it's DC or AC, you make dirty electricity. That's the bad thing. Dimmer switches do it. Compact fluorescent lights do it. Every computer's got a switching power supply in it because the guts of the computer run on DC. You can't buy DC from the utilities. And
right.
And so anything that interrupts current or makes arcing or sparking, like generator brushes. I wrote a letter to the VA to try to get them to do something about their big suicide rate that they complain about in Afghanistan and Iraq. Turns out they import $20 billion worth of fuel oil a year to air condition the kids over there, and those generators are standalone diesel generator sets, and they make dirty electricity because of brush arcing. And the more load you get, the more generators you put on, and the dirty electricity just adds up.
Well, what kind of range do these things have? I mean, how far away do you have to...
Once the dirty electricity is in a wire, it just goes wherever the wire goes.
Oh, gotcha.
So if you've got an island that's got that generates electricity at a central station, it covers the whole island. The dirt goes everywhere. And it runs down a wire for miles. In fact, Stetzer tells a cute little story. He cleaned up a school someplace in the Midwest, and about 4 days later, this dairy farmer comes steaming up to this place saying, "What did you do? What did you do?" And I said, "Well," he said, "Why?" He said, "My cows are giving 10 pounds more milk each a day." Well, his dairy farm was like 4 miles from the school, but it was having that kind of effect. He got rid of the dirty electricity from the school. It was contaminating that whole part of the grid. So the farmer was elated, of course, that making all this more money. But once it gets in the wires, it's bad. The trouble with big commercial solar and wind is the wind farms especially contaminate the ground. Their engineers found out early that their bearings wore out unless they dumped the internal currents into the ground. So they really contaminate the ground, and the wind. The vanes, the propellers, cause problems because they make a pressure wave that causes what's called wind turbine syndrome that makes people sick. But the electrical part of it is just a nightmare. It's in the air, it's in the ground, it's in the wiring, and I'm finding with solar that these big megawatt stations that generate electricity, they make it dirty, and they send dirty electricity to the people that are using it down the line. So. No place to hide.
If you could just rub the genie out of the lamp and make your own town that still had the convenience of electrical power, mm-hmm. How would you do it? Is it possible?
Okay, yeah. I thought about this. In fact, I've written some developers. There's a tremendous need for electrosensitives to find a place where they can live without getting sick. In fact, a whole bunch of them have moved to Green Bank, West Virginia, because by law you can't have any transmission because of the radio telescope there. say you can't have cell towers, etc. But first thing I'd require that the generators are going to be clean. They're going to make clean 60-cycle stuff. There's going to be no use of the earth as a return. 50% of the problems are coming from that. Then you don't have any stray voltage. The cows don't get sick. People don't get problems in their house. You don't get pipe corrosion. The other thing is no wireless, period. No Wi-Fi. They put Wi-Fi on planes. I used to be able to sleep on planes. I can't sleep anymore. I know people who can't fly anymore because they get sick, and it's going to kill the crews. I'll tell you that. The stewardesses and the pilots they're going to drop like flies when people start paying attention to it. So everything's going to be hardwired. No Wi-Fi in the schools. No handheld toys. You put a cell phone to your head. You're sticking your head in a microwave oven. I've got the devices that measure this stuff, and I show people that, hey, my microwave oven, look, I get 10 feet from it. I get this kind of a noise on my receiver, and you do that with a cell phone. It's the same thing. I mean, and you're putting your head right up against it. So the brain cancers are starting to come, so they're acoustic neuromas. And the other big problem with all of this is there's been some recent work showing that exposure of the fetus in utero to these things cause all kinds of problems like asthma and obesity. And I got another paper out showing that obesity, body mass index, and diabetes are almost certainly due to this business. We've known that for a long time, but it showed that the places that have the highest rates of these things are basically little islands or places off grid that have to use these dirty diesel generators for their electricity.
What about smart meters? That's just contributing to the problem.
That's such an oxymoron. They're the dumbest thing. Basically, once they start putting those in houses, my phone rang off the hook. People call me and say, "Hey, God, I've been sick for a week. I didn't understand what was going on. I got this. They put this thing on my house, and people with pacemakers. Sometimes they don't work. People can't sleep." They got a dirty electricity problem, too. See, they got a transmitter, which is bad enough. They're putting out Wi-Fi, and a lot of them put it out all the time, every couple of seconds. The other thing is they all have a switching power supply in them, which adds dirty electricity to the grid. In fact, I've recommended some people who've been sick from their smart meters get relief when they filter the dirty electricity, even though the smart meter is still running. Other people have been able to duck it by putting material against the wall that the thing's mounted on the inside to try to block the fields. But that's kind of chancy because you can get reflections to everywhere. But hey, they're basically going to be part of what's called a smart grid. So you got to watch out because now all the new appliances are having these 24/7 microwave transmitters in them to talk to the smart meter. My friend Stetzer bought a new freezer from Sears, and every time he opened it, he got sick. He's real electrosensitive. And he got his meters out and found out in 2 seconds that it was blasting microwaves every time he opened the lid. So he got rid of it and got one that didn't have it. But another little story about him. I told you about this woman that had this variable frequency drive on her water pump. Well, I was alert to that because Stetzer, about a couple of years ago, came back from a European trip, went to bed, woke up vomiting. He gets really sick to his stomach when he's in strong fields and knew something had happened because his house is really filtered. He had 40 filters in this big house of his, and it turns out his neighbor had put a variable speed drive on his indoor swimming pool. He had a lap pool, and that was enough to make him sick, a quarter mile away. So, the stuff goes everywhere. It makes a lot of people sick. People don't know why they're getting sick, and 9 times out of 10, it's got something to do with EMF, electromagnetic fields, and especially dirty electricity. So getting back to the ideal town, I'd change the way the places are grounded, and it'd have to be far enough from the grid so that it couldn't run in through the ground to your place. In fact, Stetzer showed me a couple of places out west where he lives, where he's shielded farms by running irrigation pipes down the ditches on the periphery of the property to let the dirty electricity in the ground, the stray voltage, run around the farm instead of going through it.
Gotcha.
That works sometimes.
Well, I'll tell you what, we have to take our little network break here at the top of the hour, but when we come back, let's talk a little bit about mobile phones and also why we went with 60 hertz, which some have said, including our friend Alex Jones, he's complained about the flicker rate on the TV, perhaps making people more susceptible to suggestibility. That combined with a subliminal message here or there might turn us into little robots without our even knowing about it. Say, it looks like it's working pretty well. John B. in with you for the ride tonight. Our guest is Dr. Samuel Milham, and we'll be right back. This is Coast to Coast AM. Stand by. Well, thank you very much for being with us tonight. We have changed phones, so the reception will be just a little bit better. And I know you want to hear what Dr. Milham has to say, so we'll take some of your calls, and we'll talk about Bluetooth. We'll talk about the European way of doing things with electricity, using 50 hertz, I believe, instead of 60 hertz, which, you know, who knows? And more to the point, what is it going to take to get those in authority to do something for us instead of take the money, go ahead and let them suffer, but by all means, take the money. Oh, you know, aren't you just a little bit sick of it? I think we all are. And some of us are getting sicker by the day because of their inaction on things that are critical to health. Makes you wonder if they care about our health at all, doesn't it? We'll be right back. This is Coast to Coast AM. Dr. Samuel Milham, tell me, does your data indicate that the suffering from electromagnetic pollution is less in Europe where they operate on 50 hertz? You see a lot of 240 over there as opposed to 60 hertz and a lot of 110 over here?
No, it doesn't. I mean, their data is pretty much parallel to ours, but you know, a lot of the countries over there have, like Finland, for example, they really have high cell phone saturation. I think those things are just bad. There's a woman, a doctor in Brazil named Dode, D-O-D-E, who she showed that what she did is she looked at cancer death rates in proximity to cell tower bases, where the dirty electricity comes from, and she found out that the excess mortality for cancer carries out to 500 meters from the base of the station of the tower. Well, that's way too far for the radio frequency from the top, so it's got to be a dirty electricity function. So in urban areas where you have these things, you know, every couple of blocks or every couple of miles, you're just in big trouble. And it's not just the cancers, like I wrote her and asked her to look at the other stuff. It's everything. So it's just they're just a curse, and they're getting stronger all the time, and they're putting it everywhere, like on airplanes and trains and college campuses and classrooms. In fact, if Obama has his way, he's going to tax cell phones and use the money to get Wi-Fi into every classroom in the country, which is just going to make those poor little kids dumber and sicker.
You know, it says right here in your book, so I'm not letting any cats out of the bag, that you were born in 1932.
Yeah, right.
And that tells me that you've seen a hell of a lot transpire over these many decades. Are we just over with?
Well, I don't know, but I'm kind of glad I'm 81 because I think it's going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. The thing that's really disturbing, and that's why I'm on here with you and why I wrote my book, is the people who should be looking after our health, FCC, the National Institutes of Health, everybody else, public health authorities at the local and state levels, just aren't doing their jobs. And they've been brought off or silenced. Politics and the money are just overwhelmed. The country is so corrupt that nothing's happening the way it should happen. I mean, they're selling Bureau of Indian BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and they're slapping big solar things all over the Southern California desert. They're putting windmills everywhere. There's huge plans to make the renewable energies, 10 times what they are now, and it's just going to make a whole lot more people sicker. And there's no jobs comes of it. Most of the ownership is offshore. And I've watched, there's an Indian reservation down there I've worked with. Everybody on the reservation's been made sick by a bunch of windmills nearby, and they're thinking of relocating this tribe that's been there for 20,000 years. It's that kind of business that just makes you want to. Well, anyway, I got to keep talking and keep working until I can't anymore.
Yeah, that's what we do. Do everything you can as well as you can for as long as you can. Now, tell you what, let's talk in terms of some solutions here. Is there a renewable green energy source, to use that really tired phrase?
Yeah, well, there's one solar source that I'm hoping will catch on. It's these towers they have as heliostats, are just concave mirrors in a circle at the bottom of the tower. They focus the sun's heat on the tower, and they melt salt, and then they can use the melted salt when the sun's down to make steam to drive a turbine or a generator. So I think that's a really good system, and I think look, if they could put people on the moon, they have to be able to design inverters that are clean. The so-called pure sine wave inverters are dirty. I mean, I've yet to see a single inverter that's clean. And I went to an inverter website a couple of years ago, and the last sentence of it was, all photovoltaic inverters cause AM radio interference, which means they're all dirty. They all they're putting out RF and dirty electricity. So that'd be a big boon if they could somehow, for solar anyway, make those inverters clean. But I think if they get enough people complaining, I complained to Yaskawa that made the pump that was making this gallon Yakima sick, and I think they paid attention, but nothing's happened so far. The only thing they understand is getting sued, and I just hate litigation. But the people who should be looking out for us just aren't doing it. And it's starting to catch up with us. I noticed for the first time in my lifetime, average life expectancy hasn't gone up. It's flat between 2010 and 2011 for this population. So I think it's not only leveling off, I think it's going to turn down too.
Before too much time gets away from it, you have written about Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah, that's almost certainly an EMF disease. And
really?
And I read this great biography of Gehrig, and it turns out that the Yankee trainer, this doc, whoever he was enamored of shortwave diathermy, which sure puts the currents and the dirty electricity into your body. And he actually burned DiMaggio's legs so bad when he was at spring training. I guess he missed some of that season. But and there's another Boston Red Sox player whose career was cut short by a diathermy treatment. You look at the Lou Gehrig's disease. It's epidemic in soccer players in Europe especially, and they love these devices that use electric shocks to dull the pain. Transcutaneous electric stimulation, it's called. And so I think there's lots of evidence that it's an EMF disease. There's a news on TV a couple of years ago. There was a young woman which caught my attention with ALS, and so I called up and talked to her, and she was a professional basketball player, and I asked her if she ever used TENS, this electric stimulation business, and she said, oh yeah, we used it all through high school, all through college, and the pros, they used a ton of it, and here she was in her early 20s with a fatal disease, and a whole group of people. I was referred to by a GP who he had 4 or 5 cases of Lou Gehrig's disease, and these people use laptops on their laps all the time. I mean, men who, and so he sent me their laptops, and boy, were they putting the juice into their bodies. I said, don't ever put a laptop on your lap, and stay as far away from your computer as you can and still use it. And if you've got computers that are dirty, filter them, because, you can get capacitive filters to plug in your outlets that'll knock down some of the dirty electricity, but it won't take care of the high-frequency stuff.
Gotcha. So it's actually the delivery of the power to your device and also your device. Yes?
The devices, a lot of the dirty electricity now is coming from devices in your house. All these little wall warts, like your cell phone charger, they all change AC to DC, so they're all making this dirty electricity. Computers are a big one. Copy machines are bad. Wireless, or some routers just make a ton of it. Some motors are dirty. Compact fluorescent lights are super bad. Regular fluorescent lights do it too. But in terms of the community, the worst offenders are the cell towers. Like in Southern California, the counties are broke. So most county buildings and like all the firehouses in Riverside County have got a stupid cell tower on them. I've measured half a dozen houses, and it's just going to kill those poor guys, firehouses, and they're putting them on schools. Even in the schools I measure, I went to a school board meeting and offered to clean up the school for free, and they refused me. A couple of schools I can't go near because they threatened me with being a terrorist under the Homeland Security Act for going in and measuring the school at the request of a teacher. Well, anyway.
Well, jumping over to cell phones real quick, these mobile phones, I take it speaker only, and the little microphone speaker combo that runs on the wire that's plugged into your ear, that's probably not helping you either. And also, what about Bluetooth?
Don't put those things. You're putting a transmitter right against your head. I mean, it's like having a cell phone up against your ear. It's bad news. I mean, I see these people who work in stores or people walking around with those things hung on their ears. Oh, God, how did that ever happen? How did the health people and the people designing these know about it? They knew. They have to know about some of the hazards. This literature's been around forever, and yet these devices are, oh boy, they're just everywhere. And little kids are addicted to their cell phones. Now they're starting to get cases of breast cancer in these young women who carry their cell phone in their bra. Never have one of those things on your body if it's on in your pocket or elsewhere. They've shown that sperm counts go down like mad if you carry a cell phone on your body if you're a guy.
Now, is any of that stuff reversible if you stop carrying it, or
I'm sure
once it's done, it's done?
A lot of it's better if you stop doing it. Some woman wrote me that she uses the Android to her right hand, and her right hand started swelling and aching, had joint troubles. I wrote her a couple weeks ago, so just don't use it. And she stopped using it, and her hand's gotten better. So I think a lot of it will back off. But I think after a certain amount of injury, chronic exposure over a long time, I think it's very hard to come back. It messes you up permanently, I think.
I gotcha. There are a bunch of people that would like to talk to you. Why don't we take a call here, shall we?
Glad to.
Dorothy on wildcard line number 1 in Snowflake, AZ.
Hey,
Come
Don,
talk to us.
I never miss your show. You're the most fantastic interviewer I've ever heard. And
Well, you're a
brought
treasure.
My hero on tonight, Dr. Milham. I'm honored to speak to you, Doctor. I've studied this issue myself for probably 5 to 10 years. I have 2 quick questions and a request to you. The first question is, physics-wise, can you explain how grounding a piece of metal reduces the antenna effect? And the second question is, if a person's building a house from scratch, do you recommend them putting the twisted electrical wire into steel conduit, or does that make the dirty electricity emanate from the walls even worse? And my request of you is, can you explain to the audience the very simple way to find out with the transistor portable AM radio how to detect dirty electricity in their house and analyze it at their power box by shutting off all the breakers and turning them on one by one to find the circuits that are the culprits?
Okay, I'll do your questions first. Steel conduit and twisted wires, good idea. But unfortunately, even if you do that, you have to plug into your outlet and like to run your computer, and so you getting exposed by the extension cord or the cord from the outlet to your machine. That's why it's important to filter at the outlet with a capacitor. And I've seen big differences in how people feel, and a lot of people get cured from their ailments just by getting rid of the kilohertz dirty electricity. The filters knock down, say, from 4 to 110 kilohertz, and that seems to be the area, the frequencies that cause the most problems. Now, you had a question about grounding. Hey, let me say this. Here's something people ought to realize. There's people out who sell. One guy written a book called Earthing, and he sells a blanket that they recommends that you sleep on this blanket that is connected to either the ground in your wall or to a ground rod outside. Don't do it. Not in this society, because everywhere I've measured, on the West Coast, East Coast, in Hawaii, the ground is full of dirty electricity, and this stuff just that technique will run it right into your body, make you sick. And a lot of people have called and said they got sick. I just don't use it. And using an AM radio, the AM radio is a beautiful, cheap device, very sensitive. You get a tuned off station on AM, and you can test it with your microwave. Put something in your microwave and listen to how the AM radio howls, and then you can walk away from it and see how far the fields are carrying. And you can walk around your house and basically identify dirty electricity and RF sources with the AM radio. And that's one of the things I do, even though I've got the expensive oscilloscopes and stuff. I always go through the house with the AM radio just to check what's going on, follow the wiring around the house to see where the dirty electricity is going and where it's coming from and how it's carrying.
Wave your cell phone around your AM radio sometime and see what happens.
Yeah, the AM radios are. I've got one I carry on all my expeditions to measure places, and it's interesting. Like in the car, you find all sorts of garbage in your cars. Some of these new cars, that hybrids and these battery-driven cars. Boy, I think they're going to be a real problem.
Man, I'll tell you, I'm going back to mechanical points and a coil with a battery, and that's going to be it. I'm going to get as far away as I can from all of that stuff. Everything from the GPS to the black box to it's extraordinarily strange. Wild too, Craig in Madison, Connecticut.
I showed that steel belt radios. But
I'm ready to volunteer for a one-way trip to Mars. Listen, I live in a private house residence in Connecticut, yet I have no Wi-Fi in my house, but I get 3 Wi-Fis from my neighbors. Okay, their signals are so strong that they come into my house. Is there any way that I can get a law passed where people can't have a signal that strong?
Hey, good luck. I mean, people get sick from their neighbors' smart meters. I've gone into houses and shut off the electric service, and I can pick up all sorts of electric garbage in the house without any electricity coming into it at all. It comes in through the ground. It comes in through the walls. If you got a Wi-Fi transmitter nearby, it'll go right through everything. No, I don't know. Good luck getting the laws changed. You're not going to have any luck. Basically, all you could do is move, or you could try shielding it if you know where it's coming from. But then that's dangerous because you might make it worse by reflecting it someplace you don't want it.
All right. Might make it worse by directing it someplace where it's not wanted.
That's right.
What are we supposed to do? Just kind of, Dr. Milham, this doesn't bode very well for civilization at large. It sounds like
I think
the apparatus is so big. What can be done? Seriously.
What happens is, I think the last sentence of my book says it all. If I can just, because I'd like to just read it the way I wrote it. Because, I've had a lot of experience with occupational disease and other things. And I watched the cigarette smoking business and the asbestos business. It took 40, 50 years after we knew what was going on before anything happened. I just say I'm afraid that our diseases of civilization will only get worse. Good science alone is never enough to force sensible public policy. Only citizens can do that. I see some of that happen with the smart meters now. There's a bunch of smart meter lawsuits, and there's some big organizations. There's a brand new documentary coming out called Take Back Your Power. I'm in it. Other people are in it. When people get a load of that, you're giving up terrible privacy if the smart grid gets put in place. The government will know and utilities know exactly what you're doing in your house, when you're doing it, if you're there, what appliances you're using, and when you use them. And they're already using it to bust pot growers, and So it's the whole thing. Whole thing sucks. It's Big Brother is watching you, and for that reason alone, I think it's bad news. But besides, it messes up the grid, it makes the ground currents higher, and it makes people sick. I just know because they call me all the time. I'm one of the few people around the world that I get calls and letters from everywhere.
Well, hold on a second. We're going to pick it right up after we take yet another break, but we must do it. This is Coast to Coast AM. We'll be right back. His website is sammilham.com, MILHAM.com, milham.com, sammilham.com, sorry, sammilham.com. And he warns us in his book, Dirty Electricity, Electrification, and the Diseases of Civilization, that because of the recent proliferation of radio frequency radiation from cell phones and towers and terrestrial antennas and all this stuff, we're looking at a looming epidemic of morbidity and mortality. In our final segment here, we'll have some of your telephone calls as quickly as we can. Everybody online, just hold your position. But really, I want to hear a little bit more from the good doctor about the steps we must take personally and as a society to coexist with this marvelous but dangerous technology. I'm taking that text directly from the homepage of sammilham.com. Check it out and be right back. This is Coast to Coast AM. Dr. Milham, do you have any, I know you're not a beekeeper, nor are you an ornithologist, but every once in a while we hear about these massive birds, massive amounts of birds being just found dead on the ground. And then, of course, there's this big scare over bees, huge numbers of bees being killed. And some people have said, well, it's a fungus, and others have said, no, it's all this Wi-Fi. Do you have any information regarding that? And if you don't, it's okay. I was just curious.
I'm curious about it too. I think a lot of it's due to EMF. I've heard I know people have done studies recently where they put a cell phone near a hive, not in a hive, just near it, and they just go away. They just can't handle it, and it may have to do with the bats too. And 10 millivolts make a cow stop giving milk. And these little animals that use the Earth's fields for navigation and to find where they are and what they're doing. You just can't change their environment this drastically and not expect problems. And then another species that's on decline are these frogs and salamanders. There's a big study showing that nationwide they've done counts showing they're declining. And the thing that caught my attention in the study was that they find even in pristine areas the animals have declined, which says, hey, it's not going to be pesticides or other stuff. It's going to be something that gets to these pristine areas. Like I've been up on a Cascade Crest Trail. There's ground voltage in the ground. There's stuff coming from space that you can measure with an oscilloscope. And I wrote the feds who wrote this paper and suggested, hey, why don't you look at this environmental electrical exposure for knocking off these animals? I think when push comes to shove, people are going to find out that's what's been going on, and this colony collapse thing. And I think, I don't know. I think it can bother people, make people sick. It can bother insects. It can bother amphibs. And I know it does cows.
You mentioned an economic collapse. You see that as an eventuality or a possibility?
Well, I know what's happening in Germany right now is they're way ahead of us with solar and wind, and a number of the countries in Europe tied to the German grid are pulling out. They don't want any part of it because they got so many windmills that when the wind stops blowing, they have to fill in with diesel generators. In fact, they're stocking generators in UK right now because they're planning to go massive wind. The other thing that's happening, big industries, they have a hard time keeping the grid flowing, and even a momentary outage will, like hurt an aluminum plant, set them back. So a lot of the big industries pulling out, and the handwriting's on the walls. These technologies. They're not the panacea or when I first came out, I said, oh boy, this is going to be the solution to global warming and to CO2 in the air. And oh boy, I was a big supporter, but the last couple of years working with this, watching how many people get sick and what it does to the ground and to the system, it's bad. They're going to have to change it dramatically. Better inverters, for one thing. I don't know how they're going to solve the windmill problem, except they can concentrate them in valleys and use the vertical axis instead of the big propellers, which cause up to 3/4 of a mile and make people sick from just a pressure wave.
Well, I must have got it wrong. I thought you said something about an economic or financial collapse. Did I just
in the book or on the air?
No. I thought you just said that a minute ago. My error. I'll take it.
No. Hey, look at these countries that have put their faith in renewable energies may face that kind of collapse as big industry pulls out, because that's where the taxes comes from.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, that's the correlation I thought you were going to draw, and then we kind of went afield a little bit. But yeah, I'm glad you clarified that. Well, we invited them to call, so let's talk to them. Wildcard line number 3, Bonnie in Nevada. Come on.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Can you hear me? I'm good, thanks. I like that little joke you made about Area 51. That was cute. I live about 30 minutes from there, and I'm sure that since they've announced that it's there, it probably has moved.
Oh, yes.
But anyway, my question is a few questions, actually. The first one is just concerning electricity. Is it possible, and this is a little bit kind of off your subject, but is it possible for a person to be electrocuted in their car while they're driving? Is it possible for you to get like an electrical jolt either from lightning or from maybe an internal, maybe electrical issue with your car if you're just touching the steering wheel? Do you know if that's possible?
No, I think a car is probably one of the safest places you can be in an electrical storm. So I don't, except for some of these fancy new expensive lithium battery cars. No, I don't think there's enough electricity to electrocute you. But I know that the fields in some cars are very, very high enough to make people who are electrosensitive sick. I've visited a colony in Arizona years ago, and they all drove around these old Mercedes diesels with fiberglass belted tires, and the radios were ripped out, and they have, the diesel electrical system. So that's the only kind of cars that they could survive in, and so they can't use a modern, souped-up electrical car like most cars are now.
Do you think the electric cars with the big batteries in the back are those bad for your health? I
think they're dangerous, and when that flood hit New York City, there were 25 of those Teslas in the garage there, and they all blew up. They all burned.
Oh.
They've had some problem with those on airplanes too. They've caused a couple plane fires.
Gotcha.
I fly model airplanes, and you got to really watch the lithium-ion batteries. You jolt them or hit them, and they'll burn or blow up on you.
Yep. Bonnie, we got to go, but thanks for your call. Appreciate you. Jerry, Wild 4, and looks like Fort Hadlock, Washington.
Hey, John, how are thee with your proper cup of tea?
Just make sure the residue doesn't stick to the sides of the cup. If it does, you know you got the wrong one.
Hey, my name's Terry. I do have a question for Dr. Milham, but that's one to let you know I'm about just a few miles from George Norrie.
Oh, no kidding.
And where he's speaking is used to be a blimp hanger, a famous blimp hanger at Fort Morton.
Yes. What's your question?
Well, I just want to let you know that the movie Officer and Gentleman was filmed at where George is at tonight.
Oh, gotcha. All right.
My question is, Doctor, I've got the old style electrical in my house with the tube,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Knob and tube.
Yeah, am I screwed or what?
No, you're not. You're probably better off.
Okay.
No, because just you're not set up for all the modern junk that makes people sick. So you're not screwed at all.
Is it even possible to go low tech, Dr. Sam?
It is, but people are trying to go off grid. They're having terrible problems with even their DC systems, with inverter problems and other problems. So I think the Amish, they've taken what they do by accident is it's prevented them from getting these horrible illnesses. They buy a farm or a house, they pull the wires out first thing, and they sell the copper, and therefore you can't get ground currents to them. Even their cows get sick because they're on the ground, but they don't get sick because they're in a house without wiring, and they don't have metal plumbing because they don't have pumps for their water, electric pumps, that is. And so I'm amazed. Parts of the world that don't have the electric grid, they don't have the childhood leukemia, they don't have these diseases of civilization like we do. And I'm not saying we should go primitive, but I think there's smart ways to be in the 20th century. I can't live without my computer, but I tell you, I got it filtered, and I never use a laptop on my lap. I use it on a battery whenever I can, and I never hook up wirelessly to it. And I don't carry the little iPhones and other business like that.
I was just wondering if it's even possible for us to get away from it, because I just saw an article recently today that a third of people who get any news at all are getting it on a mobile device. Yeah, and you combine that with between the EMF and the vision problems. I'm just going, well, we'll be smart,
I've done, and I've never had a live cell phone in my pocket. I carry one for emergencies when I hike, and it's never on. I make emergency outgoing calls, and it's never been closer than a foot from my head. That's how you should use a cell phone, and the wireless routers and wireless stuff in your house. You're just asking for trouble. I mean, and these wireless appliances, like I said, it made my friend Stetzer sick. I'm sure it makes other people sick. And if you buy a new air conditioner, they've got these variable speed fans on it. So anytime that thing's on, it's going to put terrible dirty electricity in your house. Same with furnace fans, wireless furnace fans, and they're just messing up our good old fashioned appliances with these newfangled things that are supposed to save electricity, and they don't.
Well, that's how it goes, isn't it? At first, the civilization is supposed to serve the people, and then the people wind up serving the civilization and just taking everything that comes with it. It's mostly about money. That's
obvious.
About
money.
I mean, that's it. That's all. That's pretty much it. Wild 5, Vanessa, New York City. Thanks for calling. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi. Thank you for taking my call, and thanks for a wonderful show. Well, I'll tell you, all this makes me think fondly of that Kinks song, Ape Man. Take off your clothes and go back to the jungle.
Right.
I wanted to mention something briefly about the work of Wilhelm Reich, how some people are using it to try to neutralize cell towers, and then ask you a question, please. Reich briefly did a lot of work with what he called good and bad orgone energy, and the bad orgone sounds a lot like what the dirty electricity is causing. He had some really neat, simple methods to try to neutralize it. And one of them that some people are trying to use they're planting these things around cell towers, which are basically contain steel, metal shavings, some different crystals. And one method is you can put them into like cupcake tins. You pour acrylic over them, and then when the resin hardens as it contracts, it puts pressure on the steel on the crystal. And then they're planted around, surreptitiously planted around cell towers. And there's, groups of people trying to do that, and they claim that's working. He also had something that works on a bigger area called a cloud buster, which is kind of like the steel and crystals in a bigger pot of acrylic. And you put an array of these long copper 1-inch pipes, like 6 foot, in a circle, and then you could stick them in your backyard, and it supposedly, gets rid of chemtrails, and it does a lot of good stuff. I was wondering if you had heard about that, or if you know of any other things like that. And I think that all the Coast to Coast listeners should get their own cloud busters, and maybe we'll clean this place up ourselves. What do you think about that?
I don't have a clue. And knowing how cell towers work, I don't think the acrylic acrylic cupcakes that would do a thing, because they're attached to the grid, wires coming into the base of the tower, and the dirty electricity is going to go back out on those wires, and nothing you can do above ground is going to do anything about that, and it certainly won't stop the radio frequency that's coming off the top. Well, I'm sorry to be negative, but that's my take on it.
Dr. Milham, it looks to me like we're going to have a complete shift in the societal mentality. I mean, people are practically, you didn't answer your phone. Well, I don't take it into the bathroom with me. Oh, I thought something was wrong. I mean, it's almost gotten to that point. I mean, we just need to leave our cell phones at home, turn them off, and then maybe actually go see each other.
Yeah. What's really sad is really bemoan the high suicide rates, especially in young people, and that's almost certainly an EMF disease, and it's going to get worse before it gets better, and these nasty diseases like childhood leukemia and diabetes in kids. I used to hate working on the pediatric wards because these innocent little kids coming in with these horrible things that now I know are environmentally caused. And on your intro, you mentioned the male breast cancer. We never got to say anything. Could I say a couple things about it?
Sure.
I know there's 12 separate studies done independently around the world showing that male breast cancer is almost certainly an EMF disease. I've contributed one cluster that I looked at to 3 guys who had it, who worked in the ground floor of a county building in Albuquerque next to a switchgear room that was exposing them to high levels of EMF. Now, the Marines have complained that they got an epidemic at Camp Lejeune. So I wrote them and told them about the EMF connection, and they don't answer me. I've written a commandant. I wrote the Congress people, and last year Obama and the Congress passed a law giving these guys money to settle claims. They claim that contaminated drinking water is causing their male breast cancer. Well, forget it. There's no way. I've done occupational studies of those solvents, and they don't cause breast cancer. They might cause hepatitis or liver problems, but not male breast cancer. And male breast cancer isn't the important thing. Female breast cancer is caused by the same thing, and there's a lot more of it. And EMF is causing almost all of it. And unfortunately, nobody wants to listen, but we've got to keep yelling. So I said my piece.
Mm-hmm. Well, it took a third of the population in this country to do its half of the American Revolution back in the 1700s. I wonder what the chances are of getting a third of the population to try and straighten us out technologically, and really how long it would take before the mortality rate is off the charts.
What really disappoints me is I've been to homes and point out to people, hey, look at this DECT phone, digital enhanced cordless telephones. Those are an anathema. They make people terribly ill, especially when on the bedstand. I've been in a house and had 3 or 4 of those things, and I showed them all. I used my AM radio and showed them all the other sources in their house. And come back a month later, and they're still there. People don't want to give up their toys. I mean, if they don't feel it, they don't taste it, they don't hear it, they just ignore it. And people are really addicted to these technologies, and I don't know what the answer is, but it's sure disappointing. Now, some people pay attention, of course, but a lot of people don't. They're marketing these things for little kids, which is sickening.
Yes, it is. Completely sickening. Starting at about age 5. All right, now we can get your book at sammilham.com, yes?
Amazon's got it for under $11, and you can get it from Barnes & Noble, and it's called Dirty Electricity. Make sure you get the second edition. It's short. It's a little over 100 pages, and if you had the first one, it's just 8 new pages in this one. And I've set the type off so you can tell the new stuff because it's bold.
Excellent.
And there's a whole lot of interesting stuff there. Just read it, and you can change your life. Maybe save your grandkids and yourselves a whole lot of misery.
That's a pretty good place to leave it. Yes, it's not just about us. Dr. Sam Milham, thank you very much for being on the program. The information in your book and our conversation tonight is disturbing. makes me wonder exactly how much we can do and how much we can do and how much time it'll take. But we have hope, don't we? Because it's not just about us, it's about our progeny as well. All right, let's do some open lines with you all after a while. Thanks again to Dr. Samuel Milham, MD, MPH. We'll be back.